Hey, what's up guys, Grace here, back with some more Anthem stuff to talk about, and we are getting closer and closer to the end of March, which means we're also very likely to see another big update dropping soon. This should be of course update 1.04, which promises not only to fix a lot of our issues, but also bring in some new features in Anthem, so we're going to go over that in just a bit. Some recent announcements coming from Bioware, as well as a lot of other fan suggestions too, so yeah, let's dive into it with the more important stuff, which is of course update 1.04. We're going to see a sneak peek of this update and some other features in it, allegedly in the development live stream we're going to have later today. So if you didn't pay attention to the announcement, it's supposed to go live at about 1 PM Pacific time or 3 PM Central time. Now in terms of fixes, I'm not going to go over these too much, as it's pretty much expected for all updates to solve the current problems, and Anthem does have quite a little bit of those, to say the least. We still have issues with the retrieving pilot data. There's also random kicks from the strongholds happening all the time back to the title screen, at least that's my case. Oh, and speaking of strongholds, there's a big problem right now with the fact that nobody is spending any more time on the end bosses, and instead they are just completing the first couple of chests and then pretty much leaving. So this causes some major issues, because in almost all of the dungeons that you might matchmake into, you get grouped into a partially completed dungeon, mostly right before the end boss, which pretty much ruins everything because nobody wants to do the end boss anyway, and it kind of detracts from the experience, to say the least. This is most noticeable of course with the Heart of Rage, but other strongholds have this problem as well. There are of course a few fan suggestions to fix this issue, but we're going to go over that towards the end of this video. There's also some tooltip bugs for several items and abilities that need to be fixed, some missing percentages numbers, and yeah, all of these should be fixed in the next update. There's more of course, but let's talk about the content, because the roadmap has suffered some changes again, which is expected, though I will say that it makes the update cycles hard to put your trust in, and if they change all the time, it's really hard to trust them or anything. Anyway, it looks like the roadmap was updated to include a couple more free play events that we didn't know about before, including the one called Beast of the Field Part 2, which I find interesting because I didn't know there was a first part unless I completely skipped it, so I'm not really sure what this is. But according to the event description, reports are coming in that the fauna in Bastion are acting erratically, and we should investigate the northwest corner of the map in the free play mode and see if we can find any answers. Then there's of course another one called Scar Infestation, followed by the Outlaw Outrage event that we had a while back, so these are pretty self-explanatory, I'm not going to stay too much on them. But the legendary missions and the Elysian caches have been kept to the end of the month, and most probably the biggest features to draw the players back in, at least that is my case. I'm going to play the game exclusively for those Elysian caches and get more rewards in terms of cosmetics and all of that, so I'm excited about these ones. From the latest statements coming from the developers, these were delayed for update 1.04, and the same goes with the legendary missions, so within the next week, give or take a few days, as we're getting closer to the end of March, is when these should go live in Anthem. These aren't the only things going down for Anthem though, and in fact just recently we had an interesting teaser coming from the head of live service in the newest Bioware blog post, which goes a little bit in more detail about the post-launch updates. I'm going to talk about the post itself in a bit, but there's this teaser image posted in it that shows what appears to be either a huge Shaper relic, either a big gate. If I were to take a guess, I think this is all related to the Dominion, and of course the new stronghold called the Sunken. It could also be something story related, as we have confirmation that the voice actors are actively or were actively engaged in recording sessions just last week. I know there's people who would love to see Outlaw strongholds first before going into Dominion once more, but from a lore point of view and how things concluded with the story are, something Dominion related makes a lot more sense, and I see being more immediate than anything Outlaw related, specifically because the Outlaw stuff was concluded with the side missions. We also have to keep in mind the fact that the Monitor wasn't the only one running the show. In fact, he wasn't at all running anything, he was just another big bad guy that the lore reports he's just one of many such monitors who have the affinity to the Anthem of Creation. We might even see him return at some point. I think the way he was defeated left a little bit more room for plot twists. He just tapped into this huge godly power. I don't think taking him down with like bullets or rockets is going to do the work, so I'm expecting him to make a comeback. It leaves a little bit of room to interpretation, but I know it's a stretch, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. Now going over the rest of the blog post, Casey Hudson talks a little bit more about Anthem having a rougher launch than expected, and of course we all know how that went. It seems that the team over at Bioware simply did not expect for so many of the problems to arise once millions of players started playing the game. Of course they did have some anticipation, but nowhere near to the scale that it had with, well, how it all unfolded in the past month. But despite this, they are still very much engaged into turning things around, bringing in more content as well as fixes for the game, which already happened with the previous 3 or 4 patches we already had, and all of these contain like hundreds of changes in total. It also looks like some reports are showing that Anthem having a quite successful launch, though whatever numbers these might be, I bet they have been burned through right now as the player base is kinda going into like a burning phase, so people find less reasons to play Anthem now that we kinda burned through all of the content. Even if you're not fully legendary, you kinda have played the entirety of the game and seen everything that it has to offer. Of course there's also Division 2 or other games, and yeah, there's also a lot of issues that might be off-putting to many, which is why I believe that Bioware needs to come up with something fast or risk losing even more players than the ones they already obviously did. The short version here, and the one that the blog post concludes with, is that Bioware simply did not have an experience creating online looter shooters. Of course they did create RPGs in the past, but it's a whole different ballpark to like bring it on the online and make it good enough considering we have all of this competition. Of course they could have learned a lot of the past mistakes. I am sure they took a lot of examples from the previous games, from Warframe, from Destiny, but they would still have the technical issues, which were a big focus since the launch of the game. So yeah, even if they did add in a lot more content, there's still a lot of technical issues plaguing the game. So yeah, this might even explain why so many of the features that we've seen in trailers just last year didn't make it into the final product. We've seen the vision pretty much changing completely from the trailer we first saw in 2017, so I bet there was a lot of redesigning in those 6 years of development, a lot of stuff that had to be scrapped because it just didn't work into the game, or simply they didn't have time to properly implement it, or we might see them reoccurring once the game rises back to its feet once more. Now I was talking a little bit about the strongholds and progression earlier, and yeah, there's some really awesome suggestions coming from the fanbase which should help, at least in part, with many of the problems we had regarding this. For example, here's an infographic made by Matthias M, who created some very amazing posts in the past as well, and I have featured them on the channel before. The infographic is really detailed, so hopefully Bioware will like read these and take them into account, but the biggest suggestions are aimed towards a more linear power curve to make lower rarity and early loot, especially the pre-masterwork stuff, more viable even at endgame. Another one would be for the inscription stats ranges to also increase with the item rarity. So for example, if an epic burning orb would roll on a certain inscription, like for example between 4 and 25% bonus, a legendary should roll between an 8 and 40% or somewhere along these lines. And of course these suggestions have been brought in by the fans many times in the past. It's ridiculous to see, for example, a legendary item with a 1% damage increase inscription, which makes absolutely no sense. So yeah, there should definitely be ranges depending on the quality of the item. Another cool one would be, and this I really love, is for legendaries to have an additional perk to make them feel like truly legendary items and also make them feel more powerful in the process, especially on the higher difficulties. So make all of these legendaries to have additional epic perks, which could be somewhere in the range of, you know, just providing additional buffs, like stacking buffs to your burning orb to deal more damage and so on. So definitely a lot of suggestions that could be implemented to make things a little bit more interesting. Finally, and this is probably the biggest one on the list, and where Bioware should definitely pay attention to, is for the total remake of the difficulty system. For now, the difficulty increase from easy to the Grandmaster and the 3 tiers of Grandmaster difficulty is made quite lazy to say the least, with just flat out damage and health increases for the enemies. Instead, a better mechanic would be for these percentages to be scaled down significantly and instead make some of the enemies have more and new attacks depending on their rarity. So for example, elite and legendary enemies could receive bonus attacks or types of attacks and modifiers as the difficulty goes up. So for example, have explosion on death apply poison on attack, have ice armor effect to slow down the players who attack them. So very good suggestions over here instead of some of the boring encounters we currently have, and they definitely make more sense. And these shouldn't be that hard to implement, as many of these mechanics are already in the game. Like for example, being frozen already exists as an effect in game. There's a lot of enemies in the game that explode on kill, and this is especially noticeable for some of the scars, or was it the minions? I can't really remember honestly, but one of the factions have exploding enemies when they die. It's specifically the ones that throw grenades, and once they die they also drop the grenades and explode near you, so if you're not careful you can also die. And these are just some of the effects. Of course there's many more, and these are some very solid suggestions. But yeah, if you guys have any other suggestions or something else that you would want to see in the game, go ahead and post in your comment below. I'm really curious to see what other stuff people have thought about, and from now on I'm going to take like the best comments and feature them into the next video. So whatever comment comes in at the top, or whatever I'm going to pick, is going to be featured in the next Anthem video. So yeah, post below and I'm going to try to read as much as possible. Now in the meantime, of course, if you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up and a subscribe would be super appreciated, and I guess I'll see you guys later, so peace out.